All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We are so glad you're here today for our governing board member monthly meeting. That is quite a mouthful. And it is Tuesday, September 28th. Anticipate our meeting going until 10, if not, ending a few minutes earlier and giving you back a few minutes of your morning. Thank you for being here for this hour. Just some quick, in case you missed it, news or things we've been up to over the last little bit. Our SCSB Spotlight this last month was our 2022 Utah Teacher of the Year nominees. So we had a number of charter schools that had a teacher that was nominated for Teacher of the Year. So if you had that at your school or you're curious who those nominees were, we invite you to check out our SCSB meeting. Just a real quick shout out to the following schools. We had C.S. Lewis Academy had a teacher nominated, Walden, Merritt Academy, Guadalupe School, Utah County Academy of Sciences, Valley Academy Charter School, Odyssey Charter School, Treeside Charter School, and Greenwood. So we were very excited to celebrate these wonderful teachers and all the hard work that they've done. A few other things to be aware of this month. It is close to the last part of September, but we did have our September newsletter come out, and our October one will be coming out in just a few days. So if you haven't read that newsletter, make sure you get a copy of it. You can always email me and I can send you it if you aren't sure where to find it. October promises to be a great addition as well. So make sure that you are up to date on the newsletter. Right now, our UCAT projections are open. They do close on September 1st. This does need to have your school board chair and your director are working together on those projections. So you might want to check in with your board chair or your school director and just make sure that your school has gotten those submitted on time. The OEK grant did reopen. You'll notice here that it closed last week, but hopefully your school applied for that. OEK is optional enhanced kindergarten. We have $1,000 available per classroom, and those awards will be announced in October. It'll be on consent for the school board, and then we will be notifying the schools in the next day or two after that meeting. So fingers crossed, we hope your school is able to get that grant. Also, we just wanted to make you aware of the following upcoming SCSB trainings. You're here today for the staff, board staff partnership. We have some other trainings this week for teachers and for business administrators. And then looking ahead to next month, it will again be that final week of the month. October 26th will be our next governing board training. That one will be 4:30 to 5:30, and we're going to be talking purposeful board governance that makes a difference. And that will be led by one of our SCSB staff members. There's also some trainings coming up for our directors on October 12th, teachers again on October 28th, and our business leaders on October 27th. So hope you can join us for those. With our other partners that we have on October 12th, we have the Board Leadership Academy Session 2 from our education board partners. This one is going to be all about governing for academic success. So hopefully you can join us for that. And then UAPCS has a number of trainings, and those should be really great to participate in. Again, if you need any more of this information or more details on how to connect into those meetings, just send me an email or check in with your school's portfolio manager, and we're happy to help you get to the right place. So without further ado, we will now turn the time over to Chairwoman Delana Tonks, Executive Director Jennifer Lambert, who are going to be leading us through a discussion about board staff relationships. So we will turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Marie. And so Marie asked if I would do this, and I thought, well, since we're talking about relationships, I'll invite my board chair, Chair Tonks, to join me so that we can maybe demonstrate a positive relationship, because we do have a good relationship. I feel very fortunate. I have an amazing board. And that's why we're doing some of these trainings where you get to know some of these board members, and we're excited about that. But I did invite her, and she's kind enough to take some time out of her day to join us and to also share her wisdom. If you want to go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to you, Chair Tonks, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Director Lambert. It is so great to be here this morning with all of you. I see lots of familiar names on the list, and I'm happy to see all of your faces, those of you that have your cameras off, and to see your names. As Jennifer said, we have a great relationship as chair and director for the State Charter School Board. It just makes things flow a little easier, and I feel like it makes us more productive as a board. So in my day job, I am also a director at Mountain Heights Academy, which is a public online charter school. And my background is as an educator. I taught French and Spanish in brick and mortar online district and charter in Utah and Ohio. And then I've been a principal for the last 13 years. So I'm excited to be with you today.
And just most of you know me as the State Charter School Board Executive Director, but what many of you may not know is my educational background is in political science. In fact, at one point, I was going to be a professor in political science. And what I studied, I focused on political participation, and I also had an interest in institutions. And so if you think about governing boards, that really is the intersection between them. And that's, I find it interesting that here I had studied about boards. I had focused more on city councils and other political bodies, but here I am working in a situation where I'm looking a lot at nonprofit boards. And it really is the intersection between political participation and institutions. Those of you who have talked to me about board governance, you know that I often focus on codifying things and putting things in policies and having it written out so that we aren't relying on individuals, but that the institution and the structure is set up for success. So that's what I hope we can do today. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is what we'll generally cover. I'm going to, since I was the one that was asked to present this, I am taking the lead, but Chair Tonks is going to enter in with thoughts as well. But we're going to cover, different ways that you can have a board and a director interrelate and what kind of model is best. Then we're going to talk about some paradoxes. Now, I called it paradoxes. I guess you could call it challenges, or the PC term, I guess, is opportunities. I like to call it paradoxes because they could be things that could seem to derail the relationship, but boards all over the country make it work anyway. So that's why I call them paradoxes. And then throughout, we'll be talking about how do we get from maybe where you're at right now to somewhere even better. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end if you have any questions. So I don't know, has anyone seen this graphic before? This graphic is actually pretty common when we go to different national conferences for authorizers, and they talk about that school performance is really kind of like a three-legged stool. And you have the authorizer, you have the board, and you have leadership. And the idea is that really all three of those legs are important. And that quote that is there, that comes from our oversight model. And I about got it memorized, but it says that our model is based on the theory that a concern or deficiency is best resolved at the least intrusive stage possible. And that's where we're going to focus on the board and the leadership pieces, the legs on there, because if those are strong, we as the authorizer can just support you rather than having to step in and do and fix things or to do the oversight. Chair Tonks, is there anything you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I just think this is like the canary in the mine, right? It's an early intervention model. And sometimes we don't know as board members what we don't know. And so feedback from a third party that has our interests in mind is really helpful as a way to stay on track or to get back on track. If you're starting to veer a little bit, it's really nice to be provided with that feedback after, X number of years on the state charter school board or as the state charter school board director. We can see patterns developing in best practice and what that looks like, and we can see patterns developing in concerning behaviors. So to receive feedback from the state charter school board or staff is really helpful. I would think, as especially as a director of a school, I would want that feedback. If I'm starting to go the wrong direction, I want somebody to say, hey, here's what we've seen with best practices, heads up, FYI. So I like the three-legged stool approach.
And if I can just note, a lot of times when they talk about the three-legged stool and that leadership component, they also are adding in CMOs, external management help that you may get. We're not going to be focusing on that, but there are a number of things and advice that we're going to be giving today that could apply not only to the director-board relationship, but also the relationship the board has with contracted entities. Go to the next slide. So if you have a lot of the governance consultants, especially in the charter world, they will train on a single way often to structure the board director relationship. And we wanted to take a little bit of a different tack to that, where we're talking about that there's maybe different ways to get to good, but that but there's different strengths and drawbacks. And I'm sorry, I was kind of stepping over my words. I noticed Marie was being super helpful and, redid maybe the slide where I had the CEO actually was kind of outside of that little space. That was on purpose. And so I do want
Sorry, I should have checked on that. It was right about here.
Yeah,
My apologies.
so I do want to first take a look at where the power lies. And I want to be very clear that if you're talking about the board director relationship, the ultimate power and oversight has to lie with the governing board. Now, and that's why I actually had that little quadrant where you see the CEO. That was empty because even though you could have a strong executive, you have to have a board that can oversee and to be able to balance out and to be able to effect that effective oversight so that we as an authorizer don't have to step in and do that for you. But I also, when Chair Tonks and I were talking about this, we also realized that, well, no matter how this looks, you can go into healthy or unhealthy manifestations of how this looks like. Because I have seen some boards where best intentions, they are trying to exercise good board governance and be that strong oversight, but they do it in unhealthy ways. And so we want to talk about how this can look and how you can maybe move from unhealthy to healthy. Do you have any comments or anything to add on this, Chair Thomas?
Just one of the things that has been really great about working with Jennifer is how much I have learned from her about being a better director myself at my school and focusing on the vision and the mission and implementing the board's will and making sure that I am carrying out the board's wishes through the vision and the mission, and having that alignment has been really helpful. So I've appreciated Jennifer's example with that.
Thank you for the kind words. I do also want to note that when we're talking about strength, it's not always obvious that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a strong personality. You can have someone that maybe is a strong personality where the power and the strength comes naturally, but you don't have to. In fact, that kind of individual can lead to maybe unhealthy or toxic manifestations of this dynamic. But you can have strength in a quieter way, but boards must be independent, engaged, and skilled. And that's what we're talking about in terms of strength. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Let's talk about strong boards. What do we mean? So ultimately, the power must lie with the board, period. That I'm going to emphasize that a number of times. But I do want to recognize that this can look very different. There are many different ways to good here. I just talked about personality. You can have some people who automatically, they just tend to draw attention when they walk in the room. They're just, people that you're drawn to. But you also have others who are very capable and very skilled in what they're doing, but they do a lot of the work behind the scenes. I also want to talk about that sometimes people think that good oversight and that a strong board, it means that they have to be super involved. And so then they become maybe overly involved into the management of the school. When we're talking about a strong board, we're not necessarily talking about that you have to be involved. You have to be making the day-to-day decisions. In fact, I think we're going to say that you shouldn't be doing that as a board. So let's talk about how could board oversight become, how do you know if it's unhealthy? There is something that we as staff have termed founderitis. Now it's the idea that sometimes you have, and this can be either at the director level or the board level, but you have an individual or a couple of individuals. They're the ones that started the school. This was their idea. This was their baby. And so they want to make sure that it happens the way that they envision it. And they can do this in ways, they can become a micromanager where you have some boards, they're stepping in, they're doing things such as hiring and firing of staff. They're getting involved in, pick up and drop off. They're talking about things that are really more administrative. I also sometimes think that boards can handcuff in a broader aspect. So sometimes the board has such a distinct vision, which is good. You want the board to have a very clear mission and vision, but they're so distinct in their mission that they really don't allow the director flexibility or ability in implementing that in the school. And so they aren't getting involved in the micromanaging, but they're so involved and so strict in the overall management that it still handcuffs the director. Too strong or unhealthy strong boards often won't listen to their director. And I do want to note, however, this is all often done with the best of intentions. I have seen so many boards that get into an unhealthy power relationship or power dynamic with their director, that it's toxic. And so you may not realize, you may be trying to do what is right. You're trying to do the effective oversight, but because you are trying to do that and so focused on that, you may not see that you're actually causing problems for your director and tying their hands. So how can you know if you're doing this? Well, there can be some warning signs. So if you are involved in the administrivia, if you're involved in hiring or firing of staff, if you are spending more time in your meetings discussing the how of the vision, that's a problem. If your meeting lengths are standard, just really, really long, you're probably getting into things that are not appropriate for governing boards. I also think you can go on the other end of that. I sometimes see boards where they are maybe getting too much in the weeds, and they're not being a healthy, strong board. And they actually, if you look at their meetings, they are textbook. They're really, they're good meetings, but none of the major decisions or none of the decisions are being held in the meetings. The decisions are being held with an individual board member or a couple of board members with the director. And so they are telling what needs to happen, but they're doing it outside of the meeting. And that it is also another problem in the power dynamic, that often when you have these unhealthy, strong boards, there is an unequal dynamic within the board, that you have one or two board members who are overruling the other board members, and the board isn't speaking as a whole, but it is those one or two strong board members who are really running the school, but just behind the scenes. Chair Tonks, do you have anything to add to this of what you've seen? So
Good.
what if you are having this? What are some things that you can do? You can, a lot of our boards, especially our older schools, they have had the same board members since inception. I would recommend that you look at having regular turnover. And by regular, I don't mean like every year, and don't have your whole board turnover at once, but have where you don't have these people who have been on there for 5-10 years, because they will start feeling that ownership of the school, which can be very unhealthy. Clarifying board roles in writing. That can also help if you have an individual board member who tends to be domineering, just clarifying what those board roles are. Also, part of that clarification is that you need to make sure the board speaks as a whole. Too much where you get these unhealthy board dynamics, you have individual board members who are really controlling things behind the scenes. So you make sure that your board speaks as a whole. I have to say, this is something that my board is really great at, the State Charter School Board. They are all unique individuals with unique perspectives and unique backgrounds, but they speak as a whole, and they come, and once they have good discussions about the motions that they are considering, but once that motion is made, they are unified. One thing that you're going to hear me say, well, there's a couple of things that you're going to hear me say over and over, and that is, sometimes you're not going to be able to see things when you're in it. And so having that external review, Chair Tonks already talked about this. External review, external training can help you maybe see things that you don't all otherwise see. And I would suggest that while we as an authorizer can provide that, sometimes that can be also difficult, because as an authorizer, there's also that power dynamic in of itself, where you're authorizer and you don't want to get in trouble, or there just may seem like, well, there's just a different dynamic. And we do have offerings of mentors and trainings, and we do contract with external entities as well to be able to do those things. And so we can also help you get in touch with that if you do not want to get it on your own. Another thing that you're going to hear me say quite often that can help with this relationship, and that is if you have a director evaluation. We know from the certifications that this is something that schools as a whole struggle with. Having that director evaluation and also having it meaningful. There are times where I do know that the certification, you say, yes, we have a director evaluation, but when I'm talking to the director, they don't feel like they've been evaluated. And so when you do that, make sure that you're setting some objective goals that you can really look at whether or not they're meeting, and that way they can have something to shoot for. Now, I do want to point out that not everything important is easily measured. And sometimes the most important things are harder to measure. Rubrics can help with that, but the less subjectivity that you can bring into that review, the better off both sides are going to be, and it can limit a dominating board and just put that relationship in a healthier way. Next slide. So knowing that most of our charter schools have pretty strong directors, they are often the ones that have been in at the school longer, because for a lot of our boards, there is that healthy turnover in boards. And so, but with directors, anytime you have turnover in the director, it is a challenge for the school. Even if you have a smooth transition, before I came the director for the State Charter School Board, I actually did a study analysis on this where I looked, it didn't matter if it was a needed change, because sometimes changing the director is absolutely needed, or if it was a smooth transition. It didn't matter that overall, as a whole, all of the outcome metrics did decrease in the year when there was that change. And so there is a benefit to having directors there for a long time. And even, sorry, I get distracted easily. I'll get to your question in a moment. But even when there is, when you have that, and then you have the director is the one who's in the school doing the things, they have all the knowledge, they are in practice often stronger than their boards. And a lot of our boards, I think, struggle with knowing how to provide that effective oversight. So I did not know from any of my background that that there's any model that can work with having a strong director. But I went and I did some research in preparation for this. I simply could not find anything. I looked towards for-profit and was thinking, well, they might have those stronger CEOs and they might have a better a model where you have a really strong executive and a relatively weaker board. And what I found was that they're actually moving towards having stronger boards. So this is just an example of an article. It's from the American Bar Association. Marie, if you want to click. So this is a quote that came from this article, and what they're talking about is that even they're moving towards, and it says, substantive checks and balances, and considering broader aspects of ethics, values, and corporate culture. So they're looking at those substantive checks and balances. And I like that term because it's not the board getting in and doing the things, but they're putting those checks and balances. And then in the next paragraph, it talks about that not only are they overseeing those checks and balances, but they are getting involved in creating what those look like in the design of them. Now, I know there was a couple of questions. So how do you define healthy board turnover? Is there a good metric for term? I don't know if Chair Thomas has any ideas. My thought, and one thing that I'm going to come out with this, is that there is no one right way. There are some definite wrong ways, but there's a lot of different ways to good. You need to figure out what mixes and what is appropriate for your school. There is one school where it may be that you might have a little bit of longer terms and it may work a little better. Whereas another school, you may want to have one board member stepping off and coming on each year. You definitely don't want more than that. But I would suggest every couple of years you're having some some turnover on your board. Do not turn over your whole board or half your board at one time. Definitely stagger those. Chair Tonks, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would say as long as there's a consistent on-ramp and off-ramp, then, and that should live in your bylaws, and it should say how many terms there are. So for example, at my school, our board members can do three-year terms, but they don't have to. They can leave after 3 years, they can leave after 6 years, and it provides a nice off-ramp and a nice on-ramp for somebody else to come on. So as long as there's consistent turnover in a way that makes sense for your setting, there's no one, right answer that will ensure that nothing bad ever happens at your school, or all good things. So I would just say consistent on-ramping and off-ramping.
And along with that is also consider your board chair, that the leadership within the board, that you have some ability of that also changing over, because sometimes what we see is that these schools for like 20 years, they've had the same board chair, the same board makeup. And while that provides a lot of strong consistency, it doesn't always provide the healthiest of board director relationships. Thank you. Next slide. So let's talk about strong executive. Many of our charters have very strong directors and a volunteer board. And we know that that happens. We've talked about a lot of it is because the director has been the founder, which, by the way, is definitely not a bad thing. But that does create some interesting dynamics. We've talked about longevity. I do think having a stronger executive can work, but only if you have really three things. You have a skilled board, you have a board that is also strong in themselves in that skill. The second thing is if they are engaged. You have to have an engaged. Sometimes we see boards that are super skilled, and so what we would call strong in that way, but they're not engaged. This is something that they're doing just as a side thing. They're doing it as a because someone asked them, but you have to also have them engaged. And then the third thing is they've got to be independent. They've got to be independent from the director. So I am going to, the number one thing that I'm going to suggest here is that the director should not be involved in picking who is on the board. Now, I think one of the reasons why I have such a strong board is that they're nominated by different groups, such as the Board of Education or the charter associations, but they are chosen, they're selected by the governor and then confirmed by the Senate. And so it's not like I, as a director, could just control who's on the board. I'm not choosing them. I'm not over that process. I can't just go to my neighbor and say, hey, do you want to be on my board? Or the parent that I've been working with closely in the school, hey, come be on the board. The board itself needs to be involved in selecting who's on their membership. Along with that is a lot of times boards will farm that out to their CMO to help get who's on the board. I would also suggest that you reconsider that, whoever's involved in the selection of the board, even if it's completely, and I assume it's completely just to help out, that you don't have directors who are going, ooh, I just want to get my friends on the board so I can do whatever I want. It's that they're the ones that are doing the work because this is their job. And so it's completely good intentions, but the result is that you don't have an independent board. And so the selection of the board really does need to come from the board itself. How do you know if you have too strong of an executive? The literature over and over will talk about agenda preparation, and that the board really needs to be the ones that are controlling the agenda and preparing the agenda, not the director, not a CMO. You also if you as a board feel like you are limited in your interaction with staff, that is an unhealthy dynamic between the board and the executive. While the board should not be so involved with the staff where they are overruling the director or interfering with the director's authority with their own staff, you need to be able to hear from their staff. And one of the things that we notice as an authorizer is when there are concerns or problems, we get a lot more complaints and they come to us. And when we talk to those that are giving us the complaints, we're always trying to get them to go to you, the board. And often what the complaints say is, well, the board they won't listen to us. They'll just do whatever the director says. And so what you need to have is a very formalized grievance policy that gives people access, but so that you aren't just going and reacting to something just because someone has a complaint. Trust but verify is the term. If you are maybe concerned that your director is a little too strong, again, make sure that they're independent from selection of board members. Formalize your director evaluation. You have objective deliverables on that. You may also want to consider increasing board size. That also can help if you have a challenging dynamic within your board. Increasing the size can sometimes help with that. Again, third-party reviews or trainings. Do be careful. You want to have interaction with the school community. You want to know what's going on in the school. I remember there was one time where we were taking the state charter school board around to different schools, and they were visiting schools and get to, experience and the feel of what those schools are like. And there was one school that had been having some struggles. And afterwards, it was interesting sitting in the car with the board members where they were kind of like, well, that felt different. They maybe couldn't have put their finger on exactly what was going on. We as staff did know what was going on, but they could feel that there was a difference. And so it is important as the board that there's some interaction with the community, but I just want to warn you that this can get really unhealthy really, really quickly. That we sometimes have these board members who go in and they are usurping the director's power on that. Chair Tonks, is there anything you have to share on this?
Yeah, first of all, I would just like to say a huge thank you to all of our board members who are attending this presentation or watching it later. It is really hard to find volunteer board members. Most people do not wake up in the morning and think to themselves, I'm going to go volunteer on a charter board because that's what I want to do with my life. And so I really, really appreciate those fine people who are willing to do that. I mean, the recognition and the glory, it's totally understandable. Just kidding. But it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of excitement because you get to change the lives of the students at your school through the vision, the mission, the values, the goals, objectives, and metrics. And as long as those are in alignment, and you'll hear me say that over and over again, you might be able to see on my whiteboard over here that I have my vision, mission, values, and goals listed to remind me as a director that that's what the board has hired me to do. And as long as those are in alignment and you're following those, your decisions are a lot more defensible as a board and as a director, because it's based on an external situation, right? It's based on your vision, mission, and values. So I will say that over and over again. When those are used as filters for decision making, it helps move the school forward in a way that sets the egos of directors and board members aside.
Thank you. Next slide. So we're going to move away from talking about the power dynamic and talk about how those interactions may look. And I want to note something that a lot of times when people are talking about board governance, they're talking about these interactions as ways to solve power imbalances. And I just want to emphasize, I do not believe, and from what I have seen and what I know, that these things can solve a power imbalance. that if you're going to have a power imbalance, you may have, the duties really well defined out, or you may have a really, healthy partnership on paper. But if you have a power imbalance, these are all going to move towards unhealthy manifestations of how they look. So I just want to first put that out there. What we're talking about here is the nature of the interactions. And really, unlike the other one where you do have to make sure that you have the board exercising appropriate oversight over the director, here, I really do believe you can have boards that are very distinct in laying out and separation of duties, or you can have boards where it's a little more of a partnership and they can be healthy or they can be unhealthy. And so in this, I really do think it depends upon what is best for the school. Next slide. So let's talk about distinct duties. Those of you who know Brian Carpenter, this is what he often talks about, right? That you have, this is the boards over the vision, mission, that this is what the board does. And then the director is over the administration of the school, and they're very distinct, and they're not too, there's not a lot of blurred lines or fuzziness on this. And that can be a really strong way to set up your board. I know it's how a lot of boards that they seek to take care of maybe a power imbalance with a director, a really strong director. That can help, but again, it won't solve it in of itself. There are times where I see very distinctly laid out duties, but you still have a power imbalance. So how do you know that if you've got an unhealthy version of, these separation of duties? If you're having a hard time working together, that's a clear sign. If you're really not aware of what the other really does, so if you're a board and you're just like, I don't know what my director does, or if you have a director who, I know that there's been times where I've spoken to a director who says, well, I don't know, that's not my job, that's the board's job. I don't know what's going on with that. If you're saying that, or if you cannot answer that for yourselves, it's a sign of that it's an unhealthy relationship. If you have some responsibilities that are not being assigned, that are kind of being left, where you're both expecting each other to do something, that's also a problem. This also can be a problem when there's lopsided responsibilities. I see it on both sides. I see where the board will start assigning to the director or to the CMO responsibilities that really are appropriate at the board level, or a director giving up some of their responsibilities, or a board taking some of the responsibilities that a director should have. Often these things are done under the guise or with the very real reason to correct other problems. But I would suggest that making lopsided responsibilities doesn't solve the problem, it actually creates different problems. So how could you move from unhealthy to healthy in this? Communication, that really truly is key. And having regular reports, sharing information, and that sharing of information needs to be both ways, not just the board hearing from the director. Also, you need to be very realistic about the capacity. And a lot of times when this happens, when the board says, well, you know what, we just don't have the skill set or capacity to do X. And so they give it to the director. I would suggest looking at it in a different way, that you say, well, we don't have the skill set or capacity to do something. Instead of giving it over to your director, get the training that you need. Again, contact Marie, we'll get you in contact with that training. But rather than giving it to someone else like your director, or to hiring an organization to doing it for you, seek to get that capacity. And again, if you need to increase your board size because you're volunteers and there just is too much for everyone to do what they need to on the board, you may increase the size so you have more people to take up some of that workload. Put things in writing. I think that that is super important. I know Chair Tonks, you have something, a thought about this.
Well, I just like the idea of a board job description so that when you do have new board members come on, it's not a surprise that there are tasks that need to be accomplished by the board members. Setting the expectations so that they're clear from the start is best practice for however you want to structure your board. And it also gives the board a point of measurement so that they can evaluate individual and collective performance over time, which is very helpful. We have a fairly simple one for the State Charter School Board, and then each one of my board members at Mountain Heights Academy also has a written job description that they look at on an annual basis, and they're able to do a little self-check to see, okay, am I fulfilling the duties that I said I would do when I signed up to be a board member?
Now, Jane, you asked if we could provide an example of that. Could you maybe unmute and just explain what that is?
The board job description.
When Jennifer was talking about giving things over to the director because a board as a whole lacks specific skill sets to manage, can you give me an example, or all of us an example or two, of what types of things you are talking about that have been given over in the past or might be, we might be tempted to do?
Sure, that's a really great question. So there have been times where the director maybe knows more of what's going on, and so they actually kind of, the director's leading the meetings. And in that case, I don't know if that's a skill set rather than just a knowledge, because yes, you'll have, like, the board chair will actually open the meeting, but then you notice that there isn't actually any discussion. It's all the director. And that's one thing to, I guess, as a warning sign, that if your director is doing more talking than the board in the board meetings, there's probably an imbalance there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you. So let's go on to partnership. I think Chair Tonks and I, this is probably where we most comfortably operate. I think it fits both of our styles a little better. It doesn't mean that it's better than distinct duties. I think it's a personal preference. I think if you listen to Marcy Cornell Feist, I think she tends to have a little more of this flavor. And I think it best probably works in terms of the chair and director relationship, that there is some things that where the line is a little maybe blurry or fuzzy in terms of who can do what. I do want to caution people on this, that this can often be used as an excuse for imbalances of power, that if you have, say, a director who's taking on more control and there's less board oversight, that it can be done under the best of intentions of doing a partnership on that. And so you do need to be careful on this. But I do think, for example, Chair Tonks and I, because of the nature of our agendas and meetings, that I will come to her and say, here's some things that we as staff, that could be on the agenda, that we would like to see on the agenda. She's the one that's directing the agenda, that is creating that agenda, but it's with my input because I have the knowledge of what's going on. Again, our meetings are a little bit different from your board meetings, in that your board meetings may be a little more rote in some of the things that you consider each month. Chair Tonks, in ideas of partnership, is there anything you have to add here?
No, that you said it perfectly.
I am going to move on and not because we only have about 10 more minutes. But I do want to make sure that when you're talking about a partnership, that you are being realistic. And again, you're not using it as an excuse to encroach on to the real job duties and tasks of the other. So the question is, which is best? And I believe that the real answer is it depends. But I do want to give you a caveat, and this will go to our first paradox. Right there, thank you. Just realize that what you may be most drawn to do may be what you shouldn't, you need the least. As I said, sometimes like the relationship of a partnership or distinct duties, that people try to use those to create or to solve an imbalance of power, and it just isn't going to do that. And so this is where to have someone from the outside to give you very realistic information about what that relationship looks like is super powerful and useful. We want to go to the next one. Thank you. So this is a really interesting one. The reality is your executive, your director has the information. This is their job. They're spending more than 40 hours a week doing this. And even if you are an active and involved and really strong board member, you are not spending anywhere near that amount of time in being a board member. So what can you do about this? It is super important that you as board members, you do your homework before coming to the meeting. Because if you do your homework, if you're reading the materials, so as a director, it is super important that you're getting meeting materials to the board, and the board chair getting meeting materials to the board before the board with enough time so that board members can digest it and read it. Then it's important for the board members to do that, read this stuff, do their homework, and ask good questions. And don't be afraid of asking questions. A lot of times I see board members where it's obvious that they're not understanding it. I'm not sure the person presenting is being super clear. And so they don't ask questions because they don't want to look stupid. Where in reality, if they were to ask questions, it actually would be better, and they would be doing their job. And don't let the director ever sidetrack. I did attend one school board meeting. The school actually closed, and there was some, we were trying to help the board to exercise appropriate governance and to follow up with their director. And we got where the board chair was asking some really good questions, but the director didn't really answer them, and there was no follow-up. And so just make sure that even if the director, they may not have the answers right there in front of them, that's okay. But just then make sure that you make a note so that you do get that answer later and that you follow up. Even the best of intentions of directors will sometimes forget things. And so make sure that you don't let them forget anything. Also, you need to have a very solid grievance policy. Do not base it just on someone's word, but have a policy that allows people to be able to let you know of things, because otherwise, if you're only hearing from the director and you have no access to the school otherwise, that is a really good way for that person to even unwittingly to control the information. As a director, you can help the board by getting things out to them regularly. Communication is key, and making sure that you are open to questions. Sometimes it can be a little intimidating to have things questioned. Don't interpret it as that they're not trusting you. Choose to interpret it that they're just doing their job. Chair Tonks, do you have anything to add?
Nope.
Okay. So this actually brings us to our last paradox. You need to, as a board and executive, to trust each other. but the board has to be able to oversee and evaluate the director's performance. And so this can be really challenging when there are friendships between board members and directors. I hope that all of you board members and directors are friendly with each other, but it is challenging when you're friends from outside of that board relationship. So if you start by being friends, your neighbors, or maybe you're in another situation, say like a church, where the dynamic is actually reversed, where maybe the director is now your ecclesiastical leader. And so those dynamics that exist outside of the board can make it more challenging to oversee and evaluate the performance of that individual. It also is super important. Let's say that you have good, appropriate, friendly relationships with your board. You want to trust them. So let's say you get some complaints from a teacher that says this director is horrible, and they just start complaining about them. Well, you want to trust your executive. You go to your executive, talk to them, you get a very different viewpoint of that. So you want to trust them, but at what point do you also need to make sure that you are overseeing that? So how do you navigate that? Let's go first from the director side. From the director side, you need to build strong relationships, and you need to be very open and communicate. Speaking with the board, not at the board. A lot of times I will see directors who are really good directors and boards who are really good boards, but maybe the interaction, the relationship isn't as healthy as it could be. I see the directors are speaking at their board. They're speaking to them. There isn't even opportunity or openness for discussion. Directors also, you can be transparent even when it's super hard to be so. And avoid ever getting defensive, but just explain your rationale. And so if you set the tone that you're not feeling ill at ease, it will help your board members also to feel comfortable and to be able to appropriately oversee you. As a board, again, listen, do your homework. Ask open-ended but not leading questions. So if you just say yes or no, then that isn't, that's not going to get you the kind of information that you need. The old adage, trust but verify. And you need to identify what is most important to you and then set reasonable and objective measures to hold your director accountable for that. Also, seek out independent reviews. And I do want to note that there are times when a board just feels like, yeah, we just can't trust our executive. Sometimes you do need to trust your gut. And when that happens, that's when you want to bring in a third party to maybe intervene or to review what's going on. For both sides, what do? You clarify roles, you put that in writing, you have open communication. And something that is super, super important, and I see happen a lot that should not happen, is you have to avoid campaigning. When there is a toxic relationship, especially between the director and a single board member, I see where we get campaigned to. I see where other board members on that board get campaigned to, where each side goes to different individuals and is trying to get them to believe them and not that person. You really need to work things out with that individual. UAPCS does some training for us called ACEs, where they look at crucial conversations. Things like that can be very useful to be able to have those direct conversations with the individuals that you may be having problems with. Just avoid campaigning. And as a very last resort, just consider that sometimes you may need to part ways. If it is the director and board chair who maybe are not getting along, consider that maybe you just need a different board chair, that maybe just do that rotation there, because the relationship between the director and board chair is so key to the overall relationship. I know that Chair Tonks, she had to step away. She had another meeting. I'm a minute over, so I'm just going to wrap up. And just some things that I know Chair Tonks also wanted to relay as well. Just some general tips. We've gone through these. Again, we are here also to help, and we can get you in touch with mentors and supports if you would like that. Just make sure that as a board that your mission, vision, values are aligned. It becomes easier to hold your director accountable and to know if your school's going in the direction you want it to be, if those are meaningful and strong. And you also need to listen to your director for ideas. They really are there. And as a director, you need to be able to share your ideas and bring those things up. And to be able to have that open and positive relationship where there can be that communication, because by both of you working together, that's when your school is really going to succeed and have strength. So I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank Chair Tonks for willing to be here. If there are any questions, I would be open to them. And again, I apologize for taking 2 minutes of your time.
Thank you so much, Director Lambert. We'll go ahead and open it up. If you have a question, you're welcome to drop it in chat. We'll stay on for a few minutes to answer those questions. Or you're welcome to unmute and just ask your question. If you don't have any questions, you're welcome to leave today. We will be sending out the recording, so if you would like to rewatch it or have a question, please reach out. So we'll just stay online for a few minutes.
I just do want to note, I really want to thank you all and for taking your time to do this. This is, one of the most important steps for healthy board and director relationships, to be able to have those conversations. And I would hope that at your schools that you could maybe open up those conversations where you can talk with each other and be able to address if there's any kind of concerns, that hopefully both of you can be open to that, and that you can present the concerns in a way that is positive and beneficial. And again, we do have training with UAPCS that where they provide on crucial conversations, those books. I've had my staff, we read them as staff and talked about them. They really do have some useful tools in that. And that the better relationship you can have between the director and the board, the better your school is going to be. So thank you for taking your time and for being here.
I do have a question. Of course I do, Marie. I always have questions.
Jane, I love your questions. You are such a thoughtful participant. Please don't ever stop.
Thank you. Jennifer, I have really appreciated what you've shared with us today. I'm not certain this is the appropriate place, but I think you can help me out here a little bit. When is a board involved in too much decision-making process? That's a really open-ended question, I know, but I'm new to this. And I was a teacher for a number of years, and I'm really struggling having flipped sides. And it's like, I'm questioning some of my board's detailed involvement in policies and procedures and activities and that type of thing. Can you provide some guidance, please?
Yes, that is actually a really good question. And I find that while teachers and former directors make really great board members, that sometimes the transition can be more difficult because now you're stepping away from getting used to where you're involved in the administration. Now you're having to step mindset. And that was where, you know, some of the things that if your meetings are consistently really long or that the main work of the board is being done outside of meetings, those are clear indicators that you need to refocus as a board. If you're involved in the how, generally speaking, if you're involved in the how of doing the accomplishing what it is that the board wants to set, generally speaking, you're getting involved in the administration. What you need to set is the what. You need to set that these are the expectations, these are the goals, these are the things we want to achieve, but you've got to be okay with the director maybe achieving it in a way that you wouldn't have. As long as they're achieving it, you have to allow that flexibility. Let me give you kind of a silly and non-education example, but I remember when I was younger, I would go to my grandmother's house and she had a dishwasher and she had a certain way of wanting to put in dishes. And I remember she would always tell me, because it was this big deal for her when she realized that, you know what, if people put in dishes in a different way, they still get clean. And so if she asked someone, can you please help me load the dishwasher? Her outcome was the clean dishes. It's not how it was done. It was to get the clean dishes. And that's what you need to do as a board, that you need to set, we want our students to feel safe and well-adjusted, and we want them to learn. And so you need to define, what does that look like for your school of, you know, what is the outcome of that? And then you really do have to be able to be okay with the fact that the director may want to do that in a way that is not how you would have done it. And that's why trust is so important. And if you are lacking that trust with that director, where you just don't feel like he or she is going to be able to reach your outcomes, or you don't trust what they're telling you, you need to first resolve that trust issue. But then, assuming that you have that trust, you need to step away. You need to just set, these are the overall things we want you to set. And that's also why having a good solid mission and vision is so key. So many schools I look at, they've got really great sounding missions that don't really mean a whole lot. You need to have a mission that's very direct and something that can be useful, a vision that really just paints a picture. If you have those things, then it helps the director, and you can just step out of his or her way and allow them to do the things that need to be done.
So
Did that answer?
Yes, and I guess I'm specifically searching for, should board members be directly involved in policy development, curriculum?
Absolutely. Okay,
I mean,
so
as far as the day to day, yeah. Selection.
you're talking about two different things there. So I do think that curriculum selection can belong at the board level. This is something that some boards will have, that's what they select the curriculum. Some will do that as a partnership. Some will set that this is the type of curriculum and this is the direction, and allow the board. So I do believe that curriculum selection, that's something as a board you kind of need to work out, but have that in writing. Don't just do at the drop of the hat that, oh yeah, we're now unhappy with something, so we're going to use curriculum as a way to pick at the director. In terms of policy, so if you're talking your board's policy, your board absolutely needs to be the main driver of that. If you're talking about how that policy gets implemented, say like
Procedures, right.
then you need to step away and
Back off.
director. But that's
Okay.
sometimes boards, in setting their policies, they want to be the most flexible because they don't want to tie their own hands. And so they do these policies that basically say we'll follow the law. And that's what a number of boards just have, policy after policy in different words, just say we'll follow the law. And you can absolutely do that. And there is wisdom to doing that in some ways. But here, if you're talking about setting guidance for your director, that is challenging because it doesn't set a lot of guidance for your director in which they can do those procedures. And so then that's when you start having boards getting more involved in the procedures because they haven't set good enough policies.
Okay, so in a nutshell, it's if we are, as a board, essentially delegating, trusting and delegating to our director, we need to allow that autonomy and to happen. And with checks and balances upon occasion.
That's why a director evaluation is so key, and it's the answer to a lot of if there's some dysfunction going on, that if you have a solid director evaluation where on the outset they know what your expectations are and then you actually hold them to those expectations, then that can create that box in which then you allow that flexibility for the director to achieve the things that you need them to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have another question. This is from Cody. I believe Cody's still on. So how much parental involvement is too much? And he said that we have a budget that can go towards some extra programs or purchases. Is it appropriate to ask all the parents? I know what they think or where they think the school could best use those funds. So I know that for trust lands, school trust lands, charter boards, if you have parents, sufficient parents on the board, you can also have your board serve as a school trust land. But the idea of school trust land is that it's parent driven so that the parents do have that opportunity for input and feedback on how those funds are spent. I do not think it's bad to maybe get a focus group together or to involve parents in committees. In fact, this can really help with board turnover because some boards are just dying for people to come and join, and they have a hard time to try and get members being willing to volunteer the time. Others have individuals that want to participate, but who may not be in the healthiest of ways. They have a single issue, or maybe they have a spouse who works at the school, so they want to control how things happen. It's important to bring in, if you have parents that are willing, to bring them in even earlier and maybe kind of almost like groom them to be future board members. And you can do that by bringing them on committees. So for example, you may want to bring them on to your budget committee, some parents who you think could give some very good and positive type feedback, and that won't and be able to get that input. I would imagine you can definitely do surveys. You would know better what works for your school community if you're going to get responses from your community in terms of if you send out a survey, or if you're just going to get responses from those who are upset and they're going to say, I mean, masks are a big thing. Maybe they would just say, I want to spend everything on getting masks for everyone so that they have to wear it in school. Well, that may not be the most appropriate feedback, especially in terms of what the law allows you to do and things like that. So it really is dependent on what that feedback is going to be. I would say that having strong, positively interactions with your parents is always better than having less. But I think any director will tell you that sometimes they wish they had less parent involvement at certain times where they have parents who are coming in and just upset because they don't feel like their child was treated fairly. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Cody. I guess I'll put it back to you. Did that help? Did that answer your question? Good. Okay. Well, thank you. And I guess I'll turn it back to you, Marie. I apologize for taking a little over.
No problem. I think
Flights
it's
went longer
been
than we expected.
really, really helpful and really beneficial. So thank you so much. Any questions that anyone has before we turn off our Zoom? All right, well, as always, we're just an email away. So if you need anything, let us know, and have a great rest of your day.